The Columbus Pearls. The story begins before 1776. For thousands of years, pearls have occupied a unique place in human imagination. Unlike gold, they are not mined from the earth. Unlike diamonds, they are not cut from stone. They emerge from living creatures hidden beneath the sea, formed slowly, layer upon layer, through processes that remained mysterious for most of human history. No two are exactly alike. Each is the product of chance, nature, and time. Perhaps that helps explain why pearls have inspired such fascination for so long. Most are eventually lost. They are worn, traded, inherited, scattered, or forgotten. A few survive, and on rare occasions they survive long enough to become witnesses to history. This is the story of such pearls. Not merely as beautiful objects, but as evidence from a forgotten chapter of the past. A story that begins in the Caribbean at the close of the 15th century and unfolds across exploration, empire, archaeology, science, and human ambition. Because sometimes a small object can illuminate an entire world. Today, when people think about the great treasures of the New World, they often imagine gold from Mexico or silver from the Andes. Yet before either transformed the fortunes of the Spanish Empire, another resource attracted explorers, merchants, adventurers, and royal attention. Pearls. Natural pearls harvested from the warm waters of the southern Caribbean became one of the earliest great sources of wealth flowing from the Americas into Europe. They financed ambitions, they encouraged exploration, they enriched merchants and monarchs, and they helped shape the emerging Atlantic world. But behind their beauty lay a far more complicated story. The pursuit of pearls transformed coastlines, depleted marine resources, and contributed to some of the earliest systems of labor exploitation in the Americas. Indigenous communities that had harvested pearls for generations suddenly found themselves at the center of expanding colonial ambitions. The consequences would reach far beyond the pearl beds themselves. To understand how this happened, we must travel back to the closing years of the 15th century. The year was 1498. Christopher Columbus was undertaking his third voyage across the Atlantic. Unlike his first expedition, which brought him to the islands of the Caribbean, this voyage carried him farther south toward waters no European had yet described. As his ships approached the narrow passage between Trinidad and the South American mainland, they encountered something extraordinary. Powerful currents surged through the channel. Immense quantities of fresh water poured into the sea. The force was unlike anything Columbus had witnessed before. Observing these waters, he concluded that no island could produce such a river. He believed he had reached a previously unknown continental landmass. He called the passage the Boca del Sierpe, the Serpent's Mouth. He named the surrounding region Tierra de Gracia, the Land of Grace. And there, among the indigenous peoples of the Gulf of Paria, he encountered something that immediately captured his attention. Pearls. The people he met wore them as adornment and wealth. Some were suspended from cords around their necks and arms. Others had been carefully drilled using techniques developed long before Europeans arrived in the Americas. Columbus immediately recognized their value. In letters to the Spanish crown, he described the abundance of pearls in these waters with unmistakable enthusiasm. At the time, Spain had invested heavily in Atlantic exploration. Colonies were expensive. The promised riches remained uncertain. The crown expected returns. Pearls changed the equation. Within only a few years, Spanish expeditions began returning to Europe carrying substantial quantities of natural pearls. For the first time, the New World had produced a commodity capable of generating extraordinary profits. A pearl rush had begun. New settlements emerged. Diving operations expanded. Merchants arrived. Royal officials took notice. And thousands upon thousands of pearl oysters were harvested from the surrounding waters. The centre of this new industry became a small island called Cubagua. There, a city known as Nueva Cádiz rose from the sea. Built almost entirely upon pearl wealth, it became one of the richest settlements in the Caribbean during its brief existence. Merchants, sailors, administrators, divers, enslaved labourers, and fortune seekers converged there in pursuit of opportunity and wealth. Yet prosperity carried a price. The oyster beds were relentlessly exploited. Indigenous communities suffered enormous losses. As native populations declined from disease, violence, and overwork, enslaved Africans were increasingly drawn into the industry. Patterns of extraction, labour exploitation, and environmental destruction emerged that would later spread across much of the Americas. Long before the great silver fleets crossed the Atlantic, the Caribbean pearl fisheries were already helping to shape the modern world. The effects extended far beyond Cubagua itself. The fisheries influenced trade, politics, navigation, and exploration. The voyage of Juan Ponce de Leon to Florida in 1513 emerged from a Caribbean already transformed by colonial expansion. During that same voyage, the Gulf Stream was identified, permanently altering Atlantic navigation and shortening travel times between Europe and the Americas. Meanwhile, the pearl beds themselves continued to decline. Thousands of oysters were opened in search of a few valuable pearls. Year after year, extraction intensified. Within only a few decades, the ecological foundation of the industry began to collapse. The wealth that had created Nueva Cádiz could not sustain it indefinitely. Storms battered its fragile buildings. The fisheries weakened. And by the middle of the 16th century, the city was largely abandoned, slowly surrendering to wind, sand, and sea. Its story might have ended there. For centuries, much of this history remained forgotten outside academic circles. Then, in December of 1954, archaeologists working among the ruins of Nueva Cádiz reportedly uncovered something extraordinary. Buried beneath the sands was a ceramic vessel carefully sealed with a honey-coloured cloth and containing a large quantity of natural pearls. Remarkably, the cloth had helped preserve its contents through the centuries. When it was opened, the pearls appeared well preserved, as though they had been hidden away only yesterday rather than 500 years earlier. For those who witnessed the discovery, it was a rare moment when the distant past seemed to emerge from the earth almost exactly as it had been left. Some were drilled in a rudimentary manner, consistent with descriptions found in early historical accounts. Others bore the subtle signs of prolonged use and wear, silent reminders that these pearls had once been handled, exchanged, and treasured by people whose names are now lost to history. For a brief moment, the discovery captured international attention. Then, as often happens, the story gradually faded from public memory. For decades, the pearls and the circumstances surrounding their discovery remained largely obscure, preserved only through scattered reports, archival references, and personal recollections. But the pearls survived. In recent years, a large assemblage of natural pearls underwent scientific examination, radiocarbon dating, and gemological analysis. The results consistently placed them within the era of the early Caribbean pearl fisheries. These pearls have been studied by leading institutions. They have been exhibited internationally, and they have become the foundation of a much larger story. Because these are not simply beautiful objects. They are surviving witnesses to one of the most consequential and least understood chapters of early American history. They existed before Jamestown, before Plymouth, before the United States, before the Revolution. 5 centuries later, they still have a story to tell. And that story is the reason this series exists. Through archaeology, science, history, and primary sources, the Columbus Pearls will explore the rise of the Caribbean pearl fisheries, the people who lived and worked within them, the forces that transformed the Atlantic world, and the remarkable pearls that survived to tell the tale. If you would like to explore the research behind this project, including scientific studies, historical articles, original sources, and images, please visit thecolumbuspearls.com. In our next episode, we will travel much further back in time, long before Columbus sailed west, long before European empires crossed the Atlantic, long before the rise of the Caribbean pearl fisheries. Why did pearls become one of humanity's most desired treasures? What made people across distant cultures value them so highly? And how did a gem created by a living creature become a symbol of beauty, prestige, and power throughout the ancient world? Join us next time for Episode 1, The World History of Pearls. Thank you for listening to the Columbus Pearls.